Number 10. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. During the 19th century, there was a scramble to find a polar route linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, known as the Northwest Passage. In 1845, two ships, called the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, set out from England under the command of Sir John Franklin with 129 sailors and officers on board. 2 months into the expedition, the vessels became stranded in ice in Canada's Victoria Strait. After spending a year icebound, the crews abandoned their ships. Their reasons for doing so are unclear, especially since they had packed a few years' worth of food. Graves, human remains, personal belongings, written messages, and eyewitness accounts revealed the men died in different places at different times and from different causes. But the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror were nowhere to be found, until recently that is. An expedition led by Parks Canada found the HMS Erebus in 2014 and the HMS Terror in 2016. Archaeologists investigated the HMS Terror and found that the capsized vessel is surprisingly intact. Shelves are still stacked with dinnerware and glasses, beds and desks are still in place, and scientific instruments are still in their cases. The team hopes to find journals, photographs, documents, clothing, and other evidence that can help them piece together the remaining mysteries surrounding the ill-fated Franklin expedition. Number 9. USS JOHNSTON. The U.S. Navy destroyer USS JOHNSTON sank 21,325 feet to the bottom of the Philippine Sea during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944. The 377-foot-long vessel was finally rediscovered in 2019. It's the deepest shipwreck ever found. Earlier this year, the deepest shipwreck dive in history, an exploration team descended nearly 4 miles to the sea floor to investigate the JOHNSTON. They located the front 2/3 of the wreck and surveyed it over the course of 2 8-hour dives. The team found that its hull number, 577, is still visible. Several fixtures remain in place, including gun turrets, twin torpedo racks, and numerous gun mounts. The JOHNSTON sustained damage from being hit by the Japanese Navy battleship Yamato, which at the time was the biggest warship ever built. Out of 327 crew members, 141 survived. Navy records show that around 50 men were killed by enemy action, and 45 died on life rafts from their injuries. 91 crew members, including Captain Ernest Evans, initially made it onto the lifeboats, but were never seen or heard from again. Number 8. Whydah Galley. Captain Samuel Black Sam Bellamy is one of history's most notorious pirates, and was the wealthiest pirate that ever lived. He began his life of crime during the 18th century, capturing as many as 53 ships in just a little over a year with his crew's help. In 1717, Black Sam captured a cargo and slave ship called the Whydah. Following a 3-day chase, its captain surrendered near the Bahamas, and it became Bellamy's flagship vessel. Black Sam fitted the Whydah with 10 cannons and assigned 150 of his men to operate the ship. Just weeks later, the vessel wrecked in a storm off Cape Cod, killing 140 pirates. 102 of them washed ashore, while dozens are believed to have gone down with the ship. Archaeologists discovered the treasure-laden Whydah in 1982, but they only recently found any human remains. Earlier this year, news headlines announced the discovery of 6 skeletons aboard the ship, including perhaps the remains of Black Sam himself. The bones are encased in hardened masses called concretions. Experts plan to try removing them for further analysis, including DNA testing. They're hoping to match the genetic information to a descendant of Bellamy's, whom they obtained a DNA sample from in 2018. Number 7. RMS Titanic. When the RMS Titanic set sail on April 10, 1912, it was the largest moving object in the world. Modern cruise ships would dwarf the 882-foot-long vessel, but at the time, the world marveled at the Titanic's enormity. Even today, it's one of history's most famous ships. After all, you've heard of it, right? The colossal ship was advertised for being unsinkable, but we all know how that went. It struck an iceberg on its maiden voyage, and its safety mechanisms failed to hold out against the influx of water that poured into the ship. Less than 3 hours later, the Titanic broke in two and sank in the frigid Atlantic waters of South Newfoundland. over 1,500 of the 2,224 passengers aboard died. Numerous proposals were put forth for raising the sunken ship, but it just didn't seem realistic. The Titanic sank in water 12,000 feet deep, and nobody knew exactly where it was. The Franco-American expedition finally found the wreck in 1985. Until then, explorers had thought the vessel had sank in one piece. To their surprise, it was found in two pieces that came to rest 0.3 miles apart on the ocean floor. Both sections had hit the bottom pretty hard, causing the bow to crumple and the stern to collapse completely. Parts of the ship's interior were found surprisingly intact, however, and the field of debris between the two pieces is filled with thousands of artifacts. Furniture, diningware, and personal belongings like jewelry and toys litter the seafloor, along with the shoes of victims whose bodies and clothing were eaten by sea creatures and bacteria. Many of these items have been recovered and restored for display, but it's unlikely that the ship itself will ever be brought to the surface. The Titanic's condition has worsened considerably since its rediscovery, and most experts believe it's just not possible to raise it. Many have also pointed out that doing so would be ethically questionable, because it would involve interfering with the final resting place of hundreds of victims. Number 6. USS JUNEAU. The USS JUNEAU was a US Navy cruiser that sank off the Solomon Islands in 1942 at the Battle of Guadalcanal. A Japanese torpedo struck the ship, breaking it in two and submerging it in just 20 seconds. Crews on nearby ships assumed that there were no survivors and left the scene. Altogether, 687 sailors perished, but over 100 survivors were left behind. They spent 8 days waiting for rescue in the open ocean. By the time help arrived, all but 10 men had died from shark attacks, dehydration, and the elements. 5 brothers by the name of Sullivan famously lost their lives in the disaster. At the time, there was a naval policy that prevented siblings from serving together, but it was loosely enforced, and the brothers wanted to carry out the service in one another's company. They refused to join unless they were allowed to remain together, and the Navy relented. 2 of the Sullivan brothers reportedly survived the initial sinking, but died waiting for rescue. In 2018, a crew hired by billionaire Paul Allen discovered the JUNEAU wreck in several large pieces, resting 13,800 feet below the water's surface. It's one of several famous military shipwrecks that the Allen's crew has found, including the USS Indianapolis and the USS Lexington. What do you think of the fate of the Sullivan brothers? Have you heard this tragic tale before? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible videos. Number 5. The ENCARNACION. In 2011, scientists encountered a mysterious shipwreck in the Caribbean Sea off Panama. It was in relatively shallow water, yet had somehow evaded looters and was remarkably intact, with all its cargo still aboard. The team didn't find any treasures, but the scissors, shoes, ceramics, and sword blades that the ship carried are historically valuable in their own right. It took experts 4 years to identify the wreck as the Spanish merchant ship NUESTRA SEñORA de ENCARNACION, which sank in 1681. It's the only known 17th century Spanish ship in the Americas that has managed to evade thieves and damage from bacteria and ship worms. By studying the ENCARNACION, experts have learned more about how these vessels were built and the Spanish colonial trade. ENCARNACION was part of Spain's Tierra Firma fleet, which connected Spain with its colonies in the New World. These ships were part of the first ever permanent transatlantic trade route and one of the most successful naval operations in history. Number 4. Queen Anne's Revenge. Queen Anne's Revenge has a dark history that started on day 1 of its use as a slave ship, called La Concorde. It made 3 known slave trading expeditions under its original owner, a merchant named René Montaudoin. Blackbeard and his gang intercepted La Concorde during its 3rd and final slave trading journey from Africa to the Caribbean in 1718. By the time the pirates boarded the ship 100 miles off the coast of Martinique, La Concorde's crew was weakened from months at sea. Many sailors suffered from diseases like scurvy and dysentery. Lacking the manpower to resist the pirates, the captain surrendered the ship. Blackbeard and his partners in crime navigated to the island of Bekia in the Grenadines. They searched the vessel and its crew for valuables, then embarked on a months-long crime spree, plundering ships throughout the Caribbean. Now called the Queen Anne's Revenge, the ship arrived off the South Carolina coast in 1718. The pirates blockaded the port of Charleston for nearly a week, robbing and taking prisoners from virtually every ship that attempted to bypass them. Not long after that, the ship ran aground and was abandoned off the coast of North Carolina. A private search team discovered the wreck in 1996. Since then, over 250,000 artifacts have been found, including a bronze bell, navigational instruments, diningware, and personal effects such as clothing, jewelry, and 30 cannons. The site has been listed on the National Register of Historic Places since 2004. Number 3. USS Bear. The USS Bear went down in history as one of the most famous ships in Coast Guard history. As a forerunner to modern icebreakers, she enjoyed a long career in the frigid waters of the Arctic and northern Atlantic regions, as well as Antarctica. Built in 1874, the Bear was originally used as a sealing vessel. The U.S. Navy bought the ship in 1884 and used it for an Arctic rescue mission. Then it became a Coast Guard cutter and patrolled Alaska's 20,000-mile coastline for over 40 years, searching for seal poachers, illicit traders, and shipwrecked whalers in need of help. It also served as a floating courthouse and ferried reindeer between Siberia and Alaska. From 1939 to 1941, the Bear was commissioned by the Navy for the U.S. Antarctic Service expedition. She patrolled off Greenland during World War II, making her the oldest Navy ship to be deployed outside the continental U.S., as well as one of the last ships with sails to be used in war. The Bear was retired from military service in 1948. In 1963, Philadelphia businessman Alfred Johnston bought the ship with plans to use it as a floating restaurant. While en route from California, the Bear floundered and sank 260 miles east of Boston, Massachusetts. The Coast Guard rediscovered the wreck in 2019, but it was only recently identified as the USS Bear. Its plans for further exploration remain to be seen. Number 2. Nuestra Señora de Atocha. At least 8 Spanish ships sank off the Florida Keys during a brutal hurricane in 1622. One of them was the Nuestra Señora de Atocha, a heavily armed treasure galleon laden with gold, silver, copper, gems, tobacco, and indigo. The loss of the convoy dealt a severe blow to Spain's economic well-being. It forced the crown to borrow money and sell several of its galleons to fund its activities in the 30 Years' War. The Spanish spent 30 years searching for the Atocha, but never found it. Starting in 1969, an exploration team led by treasure hunters Mel Fisher and Finley Rickard began searching for the lost vessel. In 1973, they found some silver bars from the wreck, followed by silver, gold, emeralds, and other cargo that was believed to be from the Atocha. The team discovered the actual ship 16 and a half years later, in 1985. Much of the Atocha's valuable cargo still remains at the wreck. It has an estimated worth of around $450 million in today's currency, earning it a spot in the Guinness World Records as the most valuable shipwreck ever recovered. Number 1. The Two Brothers. The novel Moby Dick was inspired by the Essex, a whaling ship that sank in 1820. Its owner, Captain George Pollard, lost another vessel, the Two Brothers, just 3 years later in a storm west of Hawaii. During the storm, the Two Brothers became separated from its sister ship, the Martha, and Captain Pollard became unaware of its position. Shortly thereafter, the vessel hit a reef and sank near the French frigate Shoals. Pollard was reluctant to abandon the Two Brothers, but his crew begged him to do so for his own safety. He finally agreed, and they waited out the storm in tiny boats while awaiting rescue from the Martha, which arrived the following day. In the aftermath of the wreck, it was thought that the Two Brothers' crew had discovered a new reef, but a search in 1931 failed to find the sunken ship or a previously unidentified landmass. Archaeologists discovered the wreck in 2008, 600 miles off Honolulu. Its location confirmed that the French frigate Shoals had been misidentified as a new reef. Earlier this year, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced that the Two Brothers was added to the National Register of Historic Places as the first discovery of a wrecked whaling ship from Nantucket, where the American whaling industry was born. Thanks for watching. Would you like to see any of these sunken ships in person? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye.